Great program tonight. One that the orchestra has certainly been looking forward to. Why? Because it's the music of Mahler. I've been looking forward to it because it's the music of Mahler. It was way back when I was a student at the Eastman School of Music, I wasn't too sure about this Mahler person because I didn't know very much about his music. When we were students in our dormitory, we used to have Mahler marathons, and I'm not sure that made me like the music of Mahler anymore, or less, actually. But we would all gather, it was about half a dozen of us, we would gather in a friend's dorm room, and starting at 8 o'clock in the evening, we'd listen to all the Mahler symphonies. We were done by the end of the first semester. They are extensive, they are meaty, they are wonderful. They are the epitome of romantic music making for symphony orchestras. They are what orchestras around the world love to perform for all different kinds of reasons, and they all have different sets of emotions, even though just about every emotion that's available to human beings is in just about every one of those symphonies. More about that later. But that's really, after intermission, the Mahler Symphony is our, if you will, if you don't mind the dinner analogy, it's our meat and potatoes course. This is the big symphonic stuff that we're looking forward to. What a great dinner this is going to be. So we have to start that dinner with something. I can't have the first course of steak and potatoes and then give you more steak and potatoes after the intermission. So we're going with a soup course, if you don't mind my using that analogy again. With a soup course with this fabulous piece by Sibelius that I've never conducted before, didn't even know existed until about 2 years ago. The incidental music to the play Belshazzar's Feast by Sibelius. Now, Belshazzar's Feast, of course, as you know, is the biblical story from the book of Daniel. And that's what the play was based on. It was called Belshazzar's Feast by a playwright named Procope, whom I've never heard of before. What's interesting about this music, all 8 pieces that Sibelius originally composed for the play, we're doing 4. All 8 pieces were not really related to the music at all, just happened to be incidental music that happened at various times during the play. So Sibelius himself liked his music enough that he decided to create an orchestral suite out of those 8 movements, which is what we're doing tonight. So we're doing 4 movements. Therefore, I don't need to tell you anything about the story of the play because it really has no meaning to the music at all. I just expect you to sit back and relax, just as you would to be sipping on a bowl of New England clam chowder at the beginning of your meal, just enjoying the warmth and the pleasantness of getting your appetite supercharged up. The 4 movements begin with Oriental March. There is an Oriental March that is the very first piece of the 8 movements of the incidental music. And I only mentioned the fact that it connects maybe to the play only in the sense that, you know, with the Old Testament, the book of Daniel being basically Middle Eastern from its geographical location, he makes this an Oriental march. Sort of a Near Eastern kind of feel. So the very first sounds you hear, coming from afar, I will add, to begin with, you'll barely hear the very first note, will be just the percussion section. Bass drums, cymbals, triangle, tambourine, a nice little jingly effect that happens. And then the low strings come in, and then the woodwinds have melodies that happen from time to time right on top of that. And it's a nice procession that happens. It's a march. It builds up to be pretty strong in its emphasis, and then dies away, and the parade goes away. And the last thing you hear is a triangle ding. It's really lovely. Following that, we have the Jewish Girl Song, which is what it was originally called. He calls it in the suite Solitude. This is really terrific, but it's so incredibly simple just to have the violin starting with ba da dee da dee da dee da dee da dee da over and over throughout the whole movement. And then you have two solos, our principal viola and our principal cello, do a little duet throughout the whole movement. Dee da da dee da da, etc. And this tune became so popular, and Sibelius himself loved it enough that he actually arranged it as a song called Solitude, which, according to the musicologists, even the singer, the great African-American singer Marian Anderson sang. He actually wrote it for her, so it's really quite interesting. Really beautiful. Speaking of beautiful, then the third movement is a nocturne, the notturno, which is what it was called in the original 8 movements as well, which is a huge flute solo. Strings don't do very much at all, but just flute floats on top, and Melissa Melans does a fantastic job with it. And then the fourth and final movement is actually a combination of 2 different dances that he had in his original 8 movements. One was the dance of life, and then the other one was the dance of death. And he's combined this in the same 2. The dance of life is really wonderful. It starts off with the violins going deedle 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 deedle, and then the flutes go yup yup ya da 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 da, and then a nice little counter melody in oboe and a little response in the French horns and the clarinets, etc. Dee da 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 dee da da dee da da dee dum jump 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 jump, and then it gets dark in the middle of the movement, and all you hear is the pizzicatos and bass drum doing boom 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 boom, and clarinets do this strange, sort of typical Sibelius type passage. Dee do 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 dee. That's the dance of death. I'm saying all the wrong pitches, but you get the idea. And then it repeats. We go back to the dance of life, and it's over. Just in a matter of, 10, 12, maybe 14 minutes. Just a wonderful way to, I think, get your ears tuned up for the adventures that are about to follow. Then for our next course, let's say it's the salad with Italian dressing. We're doing the music of Vivaldi. Now, we've all heard of Vivaldi. What I found out not too long ago was that apparently Vivaldi was an unknown character until the beginning of the 20th century. That the 500 concertos that he wrote and the 40 operas that he wrote had basically gone into oblivion after he passed in Venice. But he was discovered again, and now he's the basis for pieces in the Suzuki training program for basic students to play all different kinds of concertos. There are some people, the cynics among us, who say that he actually wrote the same concerto 500 times. But this is actually a terrific concerto. It's for 2 cellos, and it's the only one of all of his concertos that he wrote for 2 cellos. Certainly the only one that exists, and it's really a dynamic piece. It's written in 3 movements, and typical fast, slow, fast arrangement. And we have a smaller orchestra because back in Vivaldi's day, it would have been a small string section anyway. You know about him, right? Where he was for 40 years, he was at the Ospedale della Pietà, which was the hospital of pity in Venice, which was an orphanage. One of several Ospedali Grandi that existed in Venice. Orphanages, and they were all basically girls. And his orchestra at this Ospedale della Pietà were numbered about 40 in his orchestra, and became famous for travelers to come visit and listen to their performances. So it was for this group of girls that he wrote the overwhelming majority of these concertos. Well, what's really spectacular tonight's performance is the fact that we have 2 very young people as our soloists. These are our most recent winners of the Indian Hill Concerto Competition, 2 cellists who are students at Indian Hill, and they've decided to come and say hi to you. Please welcome Margalit Katzenblickstein and Alexander Zhang. Hey Alex, how are you? Hi Margalit, how are you? So welcome, it's great to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Let's see, name, rank, serial number, just name, how long you've been studying, and who your teacher is.
I'm Alex. I'm 14. I've been playing the cello for 6 years with Cynthia Forbes.
My name's Lika. I'm 15. I've been playing the cello for a while, kind of on and off, but I started having full lessons with Cynthia 5 years ago.
Great. And tell us, what is really, Marguerite, what's the hardest thing about playing cello, do you think?
I think the hardest thing is finding yourself in the right spirit to play, because if you want to play well, you have to be in the mindset of the music you're playing, and that's very, very hard to do, because you have good days and you have bad days, and it's always the hardest thing.
So Alex, what's the proper mindset for this piece?
I think we have to be really energetic when we're playing, and then we have to be able to change our tone when we need to, depending on the music.
And do you have a lot of shifting you guys have to do, or not? Yes?
Yeah, we do.
Shifting is when we have to go from one position, on the fingerboard to another position, and there are several different positions according to the number of notes that there are on the string. So, did that explain it fairly well?
Yeah.
Cool. So what's your favorite subject, you guys, in school?
I like math.
I like music and English.
Okay, and where do you expect to go from here? What grade are you now?
I'm in 8th grade.
And
I'm homeschooled.
homeschool. Okay, so 8th grade. So do you think even about after high school and what's going to happen next?
Not much.
Yay, that's my wife. And Marguerite, what about you?
I'm not really either. Being a musician would definitely be something I might want to do, but obviously I still have a couple of years before I have to think seriously about that.
Right. What do you like to do for fun, if not cello?
I like photography and writing.
Good. What kind of photography do you do?
Mostly macro photography.
But mostly what?
Macro photography.
Oh, okay. And Alex, what about you? What do you like to do for fun? I can tell you're a fun kind of guy.
I like to read or play with my brother.
Aha, okay. Hopefully you're nice to him. Yeah. Anybody get into sports at all?
I swim.
Okay. Marguerite?
Nope.
Yeah, that's a musician if I ever heard one. Well, you guys do a fabulous job, you really do. It's great to have you here, and I know everybody's really excited to listen to you. And I'll see you on stage. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Bravo. Thank you. That's our salad course. After intermission, we come back to the real reason that we've got this concert scheduled, and that's the Mahler Symphony. What you might want to know is that, speaking of program making, is that I always start with the guest artist. Whenever we line up a guest artist, we kind of know, sometimes we have an idea of what pieces we might request of a guest artist, but other times it's just knowing who the guest artist is going to be, and then they choose the piece, and then I build a program around it. Or, such as the case is tonight, we knew that we were going to have the young artists, these young artists, or a young artist anyway, on our concert, but I wanted to do something really significant in terms of the symphonic repertoire. So I decided on the Mahler and building the program around it. And in this particular case, as I've mentioned with the metaphors, I just want to get you lined up and get you into listening to this major work. The one thing about this first symphony of Mahler is that it's actually, of the 9 symphonies, the shortest. It's 53 minutes, but that means that it's only a few minutes longer than a standard Tchaikovsky symphony. So what you will find that's different in it is, and what I recommend how you listen to it, is to just follow the emotional journey. And it's a big one. There are a lot of highs and lows in the music of Mahler, and you just have to be able to listen to whichever direction he takes you, moment to moment, during those 50-some minutes. Now, putting him in some sort of historical context, this piece was composed in 1888, so that means he was 28 years old when he wrote this piece. Yeah, 28. Just imagine even today's 28-year-olds. And, you know, they're not, well, there are some, I know some who are actually composing music, but, you know, there's a lot in the soul that's aflame in your standard 28-year-old. He was trained as a pianist, but soon decided that piano was not for him, or concertizing was not for him, but he wanted to be a conductor. Some say it was because of his ego, which some others say was probably his worst enemy, but the fact that his ego encouraged him to take charge of musicians and to be a conductor. And it was really as a conductor that Mahler achieved real fame at first. He was primarily through the opera houses, but at the end of his life, in the first decade of the 1900s, he actually became, for a short time, the music director of the Metropolitan Opera in New York, and was also, for a shorter time, music director of the New York Philharmonic right after that. So he was a conductor. He did have a big ego. He had many health problems. He had issues where even in the year after this symphony was composed, 1889, when he was 29 years old, in that 1 year, he lost his father, he lost his sister, and he lost his mother, all in the same year that he premiered this as a conductor of this particular symphony. That's a lot to go through. At the same time, he was struggling while he was composing this piece as a conductor at the Royal Opera in Budapest. And the struggle there was, as he was a newcomer from Vienna, the struggle there was he came across in Hungary many conservative nationalists who wanted the repertoire of the opera company to be national, that is, Hungarian composers. He wanted to bring in the standard Austrian Germanic repertoire. Big, big struggles that are going on there. What happened was he was going through so many struggles that he wasn't writing very much, even here in his mid-20s. In connection with the opera company that he was working with, he came across a project to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the birth of Karl Maria von Weber, the great early Romantic German composer. It was, as I say, the 100th anniversary of his birth at the time, and he got all inspired about writing and recreating Weber's last opera. This sort of apparently, according to the musicologists, got him excited into actually creating his own work. And it's, as well as the fact that in doing this Weber opera, he met the grandson of the composer Weber, and he met his wife, which was unfortunate because he loved her and she was married to Mr. Weber. So when I think about that, I can't help but think, no wonder he titled the last movement of this symphony, "The Sudden Outburst of Despair from a Deeply Wounded Heart." But he composed a symphony, he did, and it went through many revisions. I won't bore you with all those details. But the symphony as we know it now consists of 4 movements. And the original titles, which are not on the program any longer, but I think help put us into context. The first movement is Spring Awakening after a long winter. Very little sound to begin with, but ends up with a great climax at the end. The second movement is his waltz and trio, or what we would call in the classical day minuet trio movement, just like Beethoven himself turned the minuet into a waltz, into a scherzo. This is a scherzo in a trio. So it's a very heavy peasant stomping dance. The third movement is a funeral march, but a fairly grotesque one in the sense that, well, he was inspired by a woodcut by this artist named von Schwind, And I was just reading today, von Schwinn, I didn't know much about him, but I found out that if you go to the Vienna State Opera, there are some paintings of opera characters and other chief musicians that were done that in the foyer of the Vienna State Opera, and happens to be called the Schwinn foyer, because he painted those. If you've ever been to the Wartburg Castle in Eisenach, Germany, which is famous for frescoes, also painted by him. And I actually found, just by doing a little Google search, all kinds of images of artworks that he did. One very interesting one, a sheet of manuscript paper, where all you saw were the 5 lines that you put notes and things on, and they were just filled out with various images, silhouette of cats. Frisky cats, sleeping cats, fat cats, skinny cats, who knows why. And the very end of the bottom of the manuscript was a whole chord of cats. Funeral march. So the woodcut was actually a funeral procession, the hunter's funeral procession. So in this case, the roles were reversed. The hunter is the one who passed and is in a procession being carried by all the animals. It's really very interesting, somewhat grotesque. And you will recognize the music as a minor version of Frere Jacques. We all know that tune. Dee-da-dee-da-dee-da-dee-da-dee-da-da. He does dee-da-da-da-dee-da-dee-da-da-da-dee, but he goes even slower. More on that later. And then the last movement after that starts with this sudden outburst of despair from a deeply wounded heart, and I guarantee you it'll be a surprise. If you happen to fall asleep at the end of the third movement, you will wake up at this point. There is a huge cymbal crash that starts it all off, and from that moment on, he called the movement From Hell to Heaven. Actually, from the Inferno to Paradiso. So it's a huge transition, and I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. So I just want to run down what to listen for. Because it's so extensive a piece, and because there's so many highs and so many lows, just don't worry about keeping track. There will be plenty of open space between the movements, so at least you'll know which is the first and the second and the third and the fourth movements. Don't worry about that. But just be ready to the very beginning of the last movement, he might go, crash, bah! You look at the woodwinds, and they're holding their instruments up like this, playing out to you. He does this. Mahler says this, bells up, he says, to winds, and sometimes to the brass, where the French horns have to put their horns up higher. Mahler was the first person to do that. And it might go all over the place, and just go with that flow. But what he's ultimately going to do, until the very end, of course, is it'll pare down, and get softer, and it'll dissipate, and it'll get a little less frequent, and then you'll bring in probably one of the most gorgeous slow tunes you've ever heard in your life. Dee-do, 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 dee-do. It's enough. It's enough up there. If you just go with the flow, you will be hopefully exhausted as I will be at the end of the performance. The first movement begins with just all the strings just playing la. It's the earth awakening from the long winter. You hear bum bum, cuckoo, dee da dee da, bird call, da dee da, bum bum, bum bum. Then you'll hear ba da dee do dee. Then you'll hear back backstage. Not on the stage, you hear trumpets. Ba, ba-da-da-ba-ba-ba, ba-da-da-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba, da-dee-da-dee-da-da-dum-da, ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba, and we all go cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo. Well, he didn't write that out, but you know, he wrote those notes out. And that he'll extend that passage for quite a while. But that dee-daw, 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 is what you're going to hear a lot. In all different kinds of fashions. Slow, fast, loud, soft, played by just one instrument, played by the whole, basically the whole orchestra. It's truly amazing what he has here. Basically two big sections in that first movement. You have that, and then he builds up, and then he'll drop it down, and he builds us up again. And the very ending of the first movement is really very interesting because he does timpani by himself, bum, 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 answered by digga, 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 bum, bum, digga, 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 bum, 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 digga, 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 bum, bum, which he says was the protagonist, the hero, running away laughing. So think about that when we do that. The second movement is the dance, completely different, non-symphonic. I encourage the orchestra, this is not a symphonic movement, this is a dance. Bum, 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 that just has a whole big swing to it, which he develops. Then suddenly you hear one horn playing, dee-ba, dee-da-dum, dee-da-da, and we're in the trio section. Slow and calm, anything but a heavy peasant dance. I told the orchestra, I think I said to them, this is when you stop dancing at the bar, you're now sitting on the wall. You're sitting on the corner, just catching your breath. Da-dum, dee-dum, dum. Ba-bum, ba-dee-um, ba-ba-ba-ba, dee-da-da, dee-da, 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 dee-dum, bum, ba, dee-da-da, dee-da, etc., etc. And then you hear one horn again going ba-bum, bum, 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 which is just the introduction for the return of the heavy dance. Bum, 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 and we proceed all the way to the end. Third movement starts off with the timpani, bum, 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 bum. Solo contrabass off to my right. Dee, 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 da. That's that funeral march for the hunter. Da, da, da. And it becomes a round, just like we used to sing it in grade school, where then the bassoon will come in, then the cellos come in later, then the tuba comes in, and pretty soon you've got the whole orchestra doing this back and forth. It's just a wonderful flow of sound. Just go with that procession, that funeral procession, if you wish. And then you'll hear the horns, dee-daw, dee-daw, dee-daw. Remember that passage, that line from the first movement? Dee-daw. And he has all the horns doing it at different times. So you hear one horn doing dee-daw, the next one dee-daw, and the next one dee-daw, and then the English horn dee-daw, and it goes on and on, also like a very short-term round. What's really interesting and significant about this slow movement is that after that initial passage, two oboes come in, da da dee dee da 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 da. All I can think of is Tevye going tradition. It's so much that flavor, and soon after that. Then he turns it into not just Tevye, but klezmer. Da 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 dum dum da, da 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 dum da da. It's almost sacrilegious in a way but it's so folksy. And you hear that um-ching in the percussion while that's happening. And then it settles down again. Dee da dee. The violins do ya da dee da dee da ya da dee da dee, etc. Dies away. Boom, boom, like it started. Boom, 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 boom. You'll barely hear the last two notes. Pizzicato in the basses and bass drum. Boom. Boom. We have taught ourselves to move very slowly, not to set up any expectations on your part. And the next thing you get is crash, and I don't want to overdo the microphone here, but it's going to be a very loud sound. But this is one of those emotional, you call it a high, call it a low, call it whatever it is, but it's definitely high-strung emotion going on here. This is that deeply wounded heart, probably because of that unrequited love that he suffered. And this is probably the longest movement of the four, and it's fairly extensive. So just go with the big shapes. Don't worry about trying to stay in tune with where we are in the piece. It's the big despair, and then the love theme comes in, which is absolutely gorgeous. Makes me cry every moment I get come to it. And then again, we come up to the torment again, lots of torment, and then the horns will come in, ba, 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 ba. Remember that? Dee-da, dee-da, dee-da. That's basically what they're doing, but in the major key now. Da-da-dee-da-da-da-da-da. Some say that's a quote of Handel's Messiah, and he shall reign forever and ever. You decide in your own minds. I'm not going to tell you what I think about it, but it's interesting because it's so big and so triumphant, the whole orchestra, and it's a big orchestra for Mahler. Mahler always asks for big orchestras. You'll see the 7 French horns all standing up at a certain point in the last movement. Then they sit down again, we all join together and we finish out the piece, and it's a biggie. It's really a biggie. We love to do this. If you've seen the Indian Hill blogs lately, this is something musicians love, to sink our teeth into this because there's so much to sink into. So it's a fabulous experience, and we hope you will join us and be there with us. Thank you so much.
Question for the students. You play cello. Do you play any other instruments?
I don't play any other instruments.
I don't either.
And also, I heard on the Tevye music, the Fiddler on the Roof music, the round and all.
That's great. That's great.
I definitely
I
could
think we
hear
brought
that.
it up. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I said Lika and Andrew. It's actually Lika and Alexander. I'm sorry.
How long have you two been playing this particular piece together?
About 5 months, 4 months.
Yeah.
What he said.
The notes mentioned that you had learned to bow together, and I've never really understood how violinists learn that or what it's all about. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
About the bowing?
Yes. Who is that? Is that a convention? Are they written in the music or?
Yes, it's a convention, but what am I trying to say? The general practice is that every member of a section plays with the same direction of bow. Many orchestras, it's the same fingerings too, because there are places where there are alternate fingerings. But so what happens is the composers, generally speaking, at least in the older days, like Mahler, didn't really put any bowings into their parts. They just wrote the notes, and it's up to the players to figure it out. And more contemporary composers actually have more specific ideas about bowings. So what happens is, if you get a piece that has no bowings in it, it goes to the principal violinist, the concertmaster, and he or she goes over the part and makes all the bowings for them, and then it gets transferred to the principal second violin. They look at their part and compare the first violin part to theirs and put their bowings in. Then that goes to the viola part, and then it goes to the cello, and then to the bass principal. And that's generally what happens. And then once those are all the principal parts are done, everybody has to have their own part. So then Then it goes back to the librarian. The librarian sits there diligently with a blank part and the marked part and marks in all the markings. And it's very time consuming, but it's also time saving so that we don't have to worry about it in rehearsal. And it also helps the string players, because when they're at home practicing the parts, they don't want to have to come to rehearsal and have to change it. We do at times when it feels like we're not accomplishing what we want to get done, but at the same time, most of the bowings are in there. Yeah.
I just want to say this was a spectacular conference, one of the best.
Thank you so much. All thanks to the two cellists that I had.
So how did the two students figure out their bowings?
Our part had bowings marked in, but as we played together over time, we slowly changed our bowings to fit with each other's.
What he said.
Did your teacher help you with that too?
Yes.
By the way, this is their teacher.
Cynthia Ford.
What made you both choose the cello as your instrument of choice?
I started playing the cello in 3rd grade when I started my school's music program, and I thought that the cello was a great instrument to start with, and I really loved it.
I just always kind of like preferred the cello over other string instruments. It's a great instrument. It's my favorite.
It's a pretty nice instrument.
Yeah.
Any more?
What was the low reed instrument at the end of the Sibelius?
Oh, in the Last Dance?
Yeah.
It was clarinet, down in the bottom of its range. Yeah. Wasn't that a nice piece?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
From which direction were the trumpet that was in the background of one of the music pieces coming from? Or were there more than one, or was it just one, or?
Did you all catch the offstage? Okay, so there were 3 offstage trumpets. The first, trumpets 1 and 2 were in the corner behind the tuba section, behind back there. There's an entryway to the band room behind us, and they were actually in the band room, playing into the band room, not to us, which made it sound very distant. And the third trumpet player was on the other side of the stage, backstage, a little bit closer. Just so that you know, Mahler is famous, I didn't say this in the preview, but Mahler's famous for being very specific with his directions to the players and the conductor especially. And in that particular case, he says that the first 2 trumpet players are to be in sehr weiter Entfernung, in the very far distance. And to the third trumpet player, he says, im weiter Entfernung, just in the distance. And then when the first two trumpets come back and play later, their next excerpt, he has another phrase that says they should be a little bit closer. So it's amazing if you just to look through a Mahler score, just to see there's almost as much verbiage as there is as there are notes, because he fills the page with all kinds of directions about what to do. He'll say, "Note to the conductor: do not go too fast." Or he's famous for saying, "Nicht schleppen," which means don't schlep, or go faster. Or nicht eilen, which is don't rush, but actually hold it back ever so slightly. Those are 2 very popular phrases that he uses. Yes.
They're off stage, and way off stage, they can't see the conductor. You're just dependent on their being able to count.
On their professionalism, yes. Well, it's interesting. Even the players generally think, "Well, how am I going to see you?" And we had this conversation ourselves. And I said to Mary Lynn Bone, our principal trumpet player, I said, don't worry about it. I just follow you. Really. I mean, all she has to do is listen to dee-da, 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 da. When she hears that last note, da, it's time to come in. And then the third trumpet player on the other side of the stage heard those two, and then he comes in a measure later, and it all kind of works out. And then they wait for the next cue, and they hear the musical cue from the stage and come in again. And yes, we had to match up at times, but then I was just going with them.
I have a couple of questions. When I was 14 years old, I had trouble keeping my shoes tied. So I'm just wondering, number one, how nervous were you tonight? And number two, do you plan to continue this as a professional career?
We were pretty nervous tonight. We were in the back and we were shaking and trying to keep off the nerves, but I definitely think I want to continue playing the cello.
Yeah, we were pretty nervous. Being a musician is definitely a profession I'm considering seriously.
Yeah.
Not a question, I just wanted to make a comment that I noticed that the two cellists always kept their eyes on each other. They would glance over each other. That's a sign of an excellent musician.
Thank you.
You do very well in chamber music that way, too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They looked at me too when they were It doesn't always happen.
I think you'll find, no offense to their teacher, but have you had your first master class with Yo-Yo Ma yet?
The question was, have they had their first master class with Yo-Yo Ma yet? Would you like to?
That would be amazing, but no, not yet.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Hi, I have a question about the French horns that stood up at the end of the Muller. And I understand that was to make them louder. And I had occasion a couple of years ago to be seated directly behind a row of French horns in rehearsal. And I didn't think that French horns actually need much help. So I don't understand why the bells face backwards in the normal playing position.
Well, that's the way the instruments are coiled. So they either have to face the back wall so the bells are pointing to us or do what they do. The question about the horn standing is, that's a tradition. At that moment in the score, in this piece. And last time I did the piece, I decided not to have the horn stand. They don't have to stand. You're absolutely right. They don't need any help in making a loud sound. But our horns wanted to stand, and at first I wasn't too sure because it's very jam-packed up there on the stage. You know, we have twice as many people basically in the wind section that we normally have. And number one, I didn't want them bumping their horns into each other. Number two, I didn't want the sound to be so loud that it was affecting the ears of the percussionists behind them, which is, you know, it's a health thing. It's a major issue these days. And but they wanted to do it. At first, I asked them to do bells up and stand up. Do this, you know, so the bells are going out this way. But they felt pretty uncomfortable, and the stage wasn't just wasn't large enough to let that happen comfortably. So I thought it looked pretty good. I thought it was pretty good. And you know, hey, it's such a big triumphant ending there. I could have had the whole orchestra stand out. Maybe I'll do that next time.
One question over here.
Yes, I suppose this is a question for all three of you. To get to the skill level that you're at, how often do you practice?
I practice every day, and I try to get 1 to 2 hours a day.
I don't practice as often as I like to, but I try to get in a practice every day and practice for an hour.
I practice whatever I'm not teaching you. That's my conducting major student from Boston Conservatory.
This is just a comment on a question. I felt the Mahler was an inspired choice for Indian Hill in particular, because we got to not only hear the music, but see the musicians enjoying themselves. And as for you, Maestro, It's always interesting to watch you, but for the moment, you put your whole self in. It was terrific.
Put your left foot in.
Okay, any other questions? All right, we got one right here.
Perhaps, just perhaps, maybe in 4 years or so, you could find a place where you could do this a little more adequately.
We'll keep that in mind, see if we can find it. Oh. Susan just whispered to me that we had an interesting circumstance last night in rehearsal. I got for Christmas a new iWatch, and I wear it in rehearsal. I don't wear it in performance. And we were conducting away, and I felt this funny vibrating feeling on my head. And, my right hand's still going, the orchestra's still playing. And during a moment, I'm trying to conduct and also see what's going on. If somebody calls, it'll hang up or something, or go automatically to voicemail. And I'm looking at it, the music's still going on, I want you to know. I'm looking at it and it says, "Are you okay? We've detected you've fallen." And so, while the music's going, I'm still holding on the stick. I'm trying to push the button, yes, I'm okay. And so I get another message, "So you've not fallen, but are you okay?" Yes! I'm trying to get them to play softer. It was very funny, actually. I found a way to turn that off, actually. Yes, sir.
I want to give a plug to the noontime lecture here at Indian Hill. I attended the lecture on Thursday, and Dr. Andrews was really a fabulous lecturer, and I really learned a lot about Mahler.
Fantastic. That's great. That's a series we started, a couple of years ago? And hopefully it's going to pick up and gain a lot of steam. Thank you for coming. Maybe one more?
You mentioned that there were other parts to the Mahler, or another part to other pieces that you played. There was like 4 or 5 other parts. Sibelius, I think.
Oh, Sibelius.
Think you'll ever get around to playing those other parts?
Oh, probably not. Maybe, but I don't know.
It would just be interesting to hear them now that we've heard the first few, kind of whet our appetite.
It would be. And it would be interesting, there's so much incidental music out there that various composers have done that were originally intended to be performed, I suppose, in a pit, along with a play, an actual play, not a music theater, but a play. And it would be nice if we did all the 8 pieces. There are only twice as many pieces as before. If we did all 8 pieces, it would be nice to maybe have some actors do some of the lines that lead into originally that piece and then come out of it again, like you can do with the Mendelssohn's Midsummer Night's Dream music, or so many others.
Are there other composers that do that same thing of having the instruments stand up and play like the French horns did in today's Mahler?
Not really.
Or is he just the only one?
It's about the only one, I think, yeah. Unless it's a contemporary composer that I don't know, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.